So I didn't leave school until like 6 or 7. Sorry, I taught middle school for a long time. I can't help it.
Welcome to the Life on Shuffle podcast, a collection of stories about people who have taken chances, embraced the unexpected, and inadvertently discovered their true passion. Today, we are featuring Jenny White from Lenore, North Carolina. In addition, we also have Amazin Eisenhower, Olivia Austin, Tehya Bly, Anna Foresti, and Josh Cooper. Jenny left college with a nursing degree and worked as one for a year. She then switched to being a school nurse, which evolved into her getting another degree in teaching. She taught for 23 years before retiring and going back into nursing. Welcome to the show, Jenny. We are so glad you could join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're just going to go ahead and get started. And our first question is, when you were younger, what did you think your profession would be?
When I was in middle school and high school, I really wanted to be a pharmacist. That's actually how I chose which college I went to. When I was a senior, I toured Carolina and knew that I loved Chapel Hill, loved Carolina, and they had a pharmacy school. So I was like, yes, this is great. That was my goal. And then I took my first college chemistry class, and I said, never mind, that is not for me. So I quickly took a health career kind of overview class, and they introduced us to different types of careers, and we would have professionals come in and speak to us and talk about, what exactly the job entailed, what kind of work you would be doing, what kind of education you needed. And then I decided that I wanted to go into nursing because I could help people and try to take care of people, which I've always enjoyed doing. And so I was blessed enough to get into their nursing school, and then I graduated and became a nurse.
I wanted to ask, you said that there are multiple things that they talked about. Were there any other careers other than just nursing that you thought you might want to switch to from pharmacy?
I sometimes thought ultrasound would be fun, but everything I thought of at that point was health related. I didn't really think about teaching until I got into my school nurse role, and then I made that switch.
Okay, so we'll jump into nursing. What's the craziest thing that happened to you while nursing, or just an interesting story, if you have any?
Well, my first clinical rotation at Carolina, we were at a huge hospital in Raleigh, and the very first patient that I got to take care of was a construction injury. He had fallen from a 10-story build and had to have both legs amputated at the hips. And so trying to learn how to care for him and help him deal with not only the physical loss, but also the emotional and the social loss. It was very eye-opening in learning how to take care of him. And, there's so much more than just the physical well-being. Health really includes emotional and mental well-being as well. So that was my very first experience as a nurse.
That's a start.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Yeah, it was a good one.
When you were doing nursing, was there any emotional regulation stuff that you felt like you had to work on as you went along to improve?
Well, when I first worked in the hospital, I worked nights and had to learn how to balance living life outside of the career while trying to work night shift. I like staying up late, but not all night. And so that was an adjustment, learning how to do that. And then learning how to be there and listen to the patients and try to address their needs while having other patients that you're trying to take care of as well. So just learning to balance what they need and providing their help.
So you were a nurse. I don't really know where. Your first job as a nurse, where was that at?
My first job was at Caldwell Memorial. My very first position was on telemetry, which means that's where they check your hearts. And so you had to learn to read the EKGs and do heart monitors and there was lots of beeping on that unit because anytime an EKG read got out of the normal rhythm, then they would start alarming and you would need to go and check, make sure patients were doing okay. So, um, that my goal was to take care of kids even when I first got out of school because I love my peds rotation and my public health rotation. So the idea of being a school nurse kind of was already planted when I was at Carolina because that was my favorite rotation was my public health rotation. I really liked the school nurse aspect and trying to help take care of kids and focus on their health. So an opening became available on the pediatric floor at Caldwell, and so I applied and got to move down there. And I worked on the pediatric floor for about 8 months, um, and really enjoyed it and loved it. The only problem is that Caldwell is a smaller hospital, so if pediatric patients have big medical needs, then they don't keep them at Caldwell because they don't have all the resources in this hospital that they would have in bigger ones. And so there weren't always a lot of pediatric patients in the hospital. Um, a lot of times you would move over and work on med surge and help adults who have had different types of surgeries, which was all great experience. Um, Helped teach me how to assess and how to, treat trauma and those kinds of things, which helped me as I became a school nurse. So in the summer after my first year of working at the hospital, a school nurse position became available and I applied and was blessed enough to get that opportunity to become a school nurse.
So take us through that part. What's the biggest differences between being just a normal nurse and then a school nurse?
In a school nurse, you're trying to, of course, take care of the health needs, but the health needs are more long-term needs, trying to help kids make sure they have the medication that they need or make sure that they have emergency plans if they have asthma or life-threatening allergies, making sure that they have the plans in place so that the teachers and the school staff know how to best take care of that child if the nurse is not available. Because unfortunately, um, you know, we're n we don't have a nurse at every school, and so you have to train people in the school how to provide care if a student has seizures or, if they're allergic to bees and they get bee stung, how do you do an EpiPen? So it was a lot of teaching at that point too, because 'cause you're teaching the staff, but you're also working with the kids trying to get what they need, for their long-term needs, whereas the hospital, you really are just taking care of whatever that acute problem is, teaching them how to take care of it at home, and then you don't see them again unless they come back to the hospital. Whereas at the school, you're trying to build relationships with those families and try to take care of their needs and be their advocate. If they need glasses, try to help connect them and try to find resources for them as well, because sometimes the biggest issue with healthcare is the funding, because healthcare and things that we need, glasses, braces, dental work, all of those are not very cheap. So trying to find resources in the community to help them also was how that was different from the hospital. So,
What was your biggest struggle from going from a nurse in a hospital to being a school nurse? Like, what was that biggest challenge for you?
in the hospital, there were always other people around that if you had questions, you could go to immediately. You could normally there were 2 nurses working on a unit together, if not 3 or 4. So if you had a question about a patient or a treatment or, "Hey, will you come listen to this lung sound and see if you hear the same thing I do?" As a school nurse, you were really more by yourself. Now you could call the other school nurses, but they couldn't be right there to assess with you, um, like you could be in the hospital. So that was different, learning to be more independent. You don't have the resources to call on immediately.
Is there one you enjoyed more, or did both have their positives and negatives?
They both definitely had their positive and negatives, but I loved school nursing. I loved being in the school system and being a part of the school staff and talking to them about healthcare, but I loved, getting kids into the office and listening to their stories and giving them Band-Aids and trying to help them feel better and take care of them. And, even if it's a kid that's complained of a stomach ache 20 times, sometimes they just needed a hug. You just calm down and be like, okay, now tell me this. Is this, or this hurting? And, a lot of times they just needed that reassurance and that special attention for a second, and then they could go back to their day and be okay. So I really liked school nursing.
So, what led you into you inferred to it, but how did you get into teaching from there?
So my favorite part of school nursing is when they would let me go into classrooms and teach classes. My favorite class I got to teach was germs to the kindergartners. I would get glitter and we would go in and we would put glitter on our hands and we'd walk around and we'd shake hands and high five. And the custodians did not like me very much, but I promised them I would clean it up when we got done. Um, and then watch there would be a trail of glitter from their kindergarten classroom to the bathroom because, you had to go wash your hands, and so it went everywhere. But I loved getting in the classroom and teaching the kids, and I even enjoyed the puberty class. I taught to 5th grade. I even thought that was a fun time. At that point, puberty was taught boys were in one room, girls were in another room, and it was taught very differently than it is today. Um, so I even enjoyed those classes. You know, it's fun to talk to kids and help them learn. And so I just went to the principal at Collegeville at that time and I was like, hey, I really like the teaching part of this job. Would there be any way with my degree that I could get into education? And he was like, well, I don't know. Let me send it to the Ed Center. So the Ed Center was like, well, with your nursing background, that really could put you on the path to being a science teacher. I was like, okay, sure. So at that point, 20 some years ago, you could become a teacher through a process called lateral entry, where you had a 4-year degree in a different subject, but you could just start teaching without having your teaching degree. So I had no teaching classes my very first year of teaching, um, with the promise that I would take 7 classes total in order to become certified to teach English. My very first year, I actually taught English, math. Do you two believe that I taught math? That's crazy, isn't it? English, math, science, and social studies. I was self-contained, 6th grade. And so through that process, I took 7 classes at Appalachian, some about teaching, some about just arts and other things to say that I could be certified to teach, and um, loved it. Loved being in the classroom. Um, I missed the health part a little bit, but I really enjoyed the education. The other part that made me decide to leave school nursing and go into teaching is that at that point, school nurses worked year round. And when there was not school, school nurses had to go do home health and take care of elderly patients. And I did not enjoy that then, which is going to be real ironic in a minute. But I did not enjoy that at that point in my life. I was just like, no, I just want to be with little people. I like young people. I like kids. I don't want to take care of adults at that point in life. And so God just opened the door for me to move into the classroom. And I was so blessed to get to go to Collegeville. That was one of the schools that I was a school nurse at. And so I'd already met a lot of the people there and enjoyed them. And so I started working in middle school because that was the grade level that they said would be easiest for me to align my degree to. So
What was your favorite grade to teach to?
I taught only 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and they all are wonderful and unique. So I don't know that I could pick between the 3. The 6th graders were lots of fun. They're energetic and rambunctious and learning how to do middle school. 7th grade is super fun because there's lots of changing in 7th grade. The way you start 7th grade is not how you end 7th grade, and so that's a lot of fun. 8th grade is great because, really their goal is to move on to high school and trying to become who they want to be as they grow up. And so each grade is fun and unique. My favorite content to teach was definitely 7th grade science because that was the human body and cells. I love that. How long did we spend on that? Most of the year?
A very long time.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I can't help it. It was so fun. I, if I could stretch that and not teach energy, that was okay. We got some energy.
A little bit.
A little.
That's all we needed.
That's all you needed. Just a little energy. That was fine. But that was fun.
How hard was the jump to go between nursing and only seeing these students in a classroom very rarely to being in a classroom full time and being an actual teacher?
It was very challenging doing because teachers, I think, have the hardest job of anyone I know. They are taking care of kids and trying to teach content, which is hard in itself, and trying to deliver information, but then make sure kids are understanding and learning that information. But more than that, it's learning to relate to the kids and talk to their families. And, if they're having a rough day, take time to talk to them and try to help with that. So teaching was definitely a much harder job. I liked being in one place because when I was a school nurse, I had 5 different schools that I ran around to. So I really enjoyed being in one location instead of bouncing around. That was nice. The 5 schools I went to were awesome, and all the people there were great, but it was just nice to be in one spot and have the same set of people who really are my family. I mean, I just spent the weekend with all my sweet friends from school. So, they will forever be my family because I grew up with them. So,
So following that, what was your favorite part you think about teaching?
um, that's a hard question. There's lots of good things. I think my favorite part are watching the kids and seeing what beautiful people they are and are becoming each and every day, and to see all the amazing things that they go on to do. Um, you know, I love watching Facebook and seeing all the stories of the kids and the ones that should still be in 6th grade or 7th or 8th, and now they have a middle schooler of their own. I'm like, man, I've been doing this a long time. But I love that part, seeing kids grow and go on to do wonderful things. So I think that's my favorite part of teaching.
You mentioned teaching for slightly over 20 years. Was there like a major change from when you had first started teaching and like the atmosphere then to how it was when you were starting to finish up?
Yeah, teaching has definitely changed in the last 23 years. When I started, we did testing, but that didn't seem to be the focus of the school year. We did AR, we did an EOG at the end of the year, but we got to do a lot of projects. I loved doing a project. We got to be more autonomous in what we taught. We got to pick the stories that we read and, the way that we wanted to teach the math. There wasn't such a strict um, pace that we had to go. As I moved on in education, there became more guidelines of you have to teach this content in this order, and we're going to assess you every 9 weeks now, which I think takes a lot of time away from opportunities in the classroom. At that point, there was also a writing test, and I don't like testing, but I do think the writing test helped us focus on writing. And so I enjoyed teaching writing at the beginning of my career, but I felt like, the last 10 or so years when that test went away, it's like people didn't emphasize writing, and it we didn't have time to do writing because of all the assessment and all the testing that started. So if I had to pick one thing that really led me to leave education, it was testing. I just don't feel like one test is the best way to show whether a student understands what's being taught in the classroom, I think. And kids have different gifts and strengths, and not everyone's is picking A, B, C, or D on a piece of paper one day.
So before we move into why you left teaching, I want to
Yeah.
stay in teaching for just a little longer.
Yes.
Do you have like any crazy stories that you could share with us about teaching?
Well, lots of fun stories. There was a ghost at our school,
There was.
George. So there was a ghost at Collinsville.
Y'all love George.
Yeah, George. He harassed my class a lot when I was in 6th grade in particular. He would flip the lights all the time and like my screen, back in those days you had the pull down screen. My pull down screen would fly up a lot. And so, um, that was always fun hearing George stories. Like we got to the point I used to stay at school really late when my first couple years because, you know, I was trying to get everything done and get all my plans ready for the next day and get everything graded. And so I didn't leave school until like 6 or 7. Sorry, I taught middle school for a long time. I can't help it. So, sorry, I couldn't help it. So I wouldn't leave Collinsville until like it was dark in the wintertime. And I would hear noises out in the hall, be like, okay, it's time to go. George is around. So I would grab my stuff and go. I learned not to stay so late that night. But that was fun. After middle school dances, sometimes we would take our personal children into the middle school hallway and let them experience some Georginess. Because you can feel the difference. Like the temperature changed when you ran around the middle school hall. It was George, I think. That was super fun. Doing things like dances and field trips and field day. Those were my favorite days. Activity days. When Miss Davis and I taught 6th grade together, we read a novel called The Phantom Tollbooth. And so we would dress up and have Phantom Tollbooth Day. She was the mathematician. And that's sad. I don't remember what the word person was called that I was. But I was in charge of Dictionopolis. And so we decorated our rooms and we did different activities related to the novels. I love doing stuff like that. My first couple years that I worked with Miss Hyman, we did 6th grade. And so we got to teach Greek gods and goddesses. And we turned my room into the home of the Olympians, and I had parents that came in and they literally hung white sheets from my ceiling down to the floor to make it look like the throne room of Zeus and then the kids dressed up and they did presentations. We tied it into curriculum, I promise, because they researched the different gods and goddesses and then they dressed up as those characters and then they presented that day and then we watched Hercules because, you have to make it fun. So I enjoyed doing activities like that. That was definitely my favorite part of teaching. So
When looking back over your entire career of teaching and before, like when you were starting as like a school nurse and just nurse in general, how hard was it trying to like build a family or juggle that family with those careers?
being in the school system is a great job for families, for parents, because your schedule is, your work day is Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 3:30. Those are your hours. However, all teachers will attest that it's a lot more time than that. So it was great when the girls were little because I would go to school, I would work. When the girls were really little and in daycare, I dropped them off, Jonathan picked them up, and then we'd come home and we would hang out. And then when they went to bed, that's when I would work on homework and stay up and grade and make plans and those kinds of things. As the girls got older and came to school with me, that was the other great thing. They got to be at school with me from kindergarten to 8th grade because I was at Collinsville. So there were other teacher kids that were there that were their ages too, and so it was great for them. They loved it if we stayed late after school because they would run and play. I was actually talking to Miss McMasters this weekend about when Leah and her son Carson and Alyssa were little, the 3 of them would play in the library, and they would go get on the computer and shop for cabins for us to go stay at. They really like to travel, and so they would make a list of cabins that they wanted us to stay at every summer. So, it was great because we had family at the school too. So it was wonderful, getting to have my kids grow up with that. Now, on the other hand, sometimes teachers' kids have it a little harder because sometimes if your students in the classroom have been a little more challenging that day, I didn't always take it out on the children at school. Sometimes I would take it out on Leah and Gracie, which they like to still bring up to me that I would fuss at them and not the children. So, you know, there's that aspect as well that sometimes teachers' kids have different expectations and they get fussed at just because they're a kid and close to that group's age. But it was great to be once they started school to be off when they were and to be able to participate in all the activities that they did since I got to be at their school, kindergarten through 8th grade. If they were doing something special in the classroom, I could run down the hall and get to watch them, and that was a lot of fun too. So I was very blessed. I know that very much.
Would you recommend going into teaching for like anyone? Or do you think that you kind of need to be a certain type of person to get into teaching?
I think if you want to go into teaching, it's not a job you do for the paycheck. Um, it is a job you do because you love kids and you want to see kids be successful and you want to try to help them discover who they are and what their interests are. I don't think um, it's a job that you can just do 8 to 3 or 8 to 4. It is a job that's going to take time and dedication. And so I think people need to consider that it is not high paid babysitting. I had a parent tell me that one time that teachers were just high paid babysitters. So I was like, I don't think so. I was just like, oh, okay. I didn't really respond because we also went to church with this person. And so I was just like, oh, okay. Yeah. We'll see. But, so it is a job that you have to be willing to put time and effort into in order to be effective, I think.
What would you say the hardest part of teaching was for you personally?
For me personally, it was meeting the standards of the state with the amount of support and the guidelines that they have. Like before COVID, I don't want to blame COVID for things, but before testing changed, like my kids did great on EOGs as a whole. Um, I might have 1 or 2 that didn't do great, and I could explain why they didn't. But then it's like the test kept changing, and I would have kids that did fabulous all year long, and then on that test, they didn't do great. And I'm like, I don't, and I couldn't explain why they did poorly or what I could have done differently to try to help them. And I hated that. I hated testing. I hated getting scores back and being like, oh my gosh, that kid didn't do well, or that kid didn't do as well as I thought they would. And so testing was definitely the worst part of teaching for me. I hated that part.
And you said that's kind of what caused you to want to leave.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I every year at the end of the year, Jonathan's like, just don't look at them. I was like, I can't help it. I have to. Um, I just had gotten to the point that I felt so bad about not doing what I needed to for kids, is how I felt. And so I just talked to a friend at church one day because, once you're 50 and you have over 20 years in education, you can retire. And so I was talking to her about what opportunities she might have in her field because she was a nurse supervisor at Blue Ridge Healthcare. Um, and she was over a diabetic educator. And as you guys know, I'm diabetic. I was like, hey, I'm diabetic. I have been an educator. That sounds like a great job for me. And so I talked to her at church one day about that. And so that's kind of what got the process going of me leaving education. I didn't have the intent of getting out exactly when I did, but it was just a God thing, as I've told y'all before. So,
So take us through the process of how you switched and kind of moved into a whole different career.
so I talked to Amanda at church. She is over the program, or she was at that point over the program called Annual Wellness Nurses at Blue Ridge Healthcare. And one of those annual wellness nurses was a diabetic educator. And so when I asked her about, hey, what do you have to do to become a diabetic educator? She was like, well, let me give you Kim's number and you can talk to her. So I called Kim, who was fabulous. And she said, well, in order to be a diabetic educator, you have to come observe me for 1,000 hours while I'm doing diabetic education, which she only does half a day, 1 day a week. I was like, oh, well, okay, never mind. Scrap that idea. We're not going to worry about that. But while I was talking to Kim on the phone, she was like, well, tell me about your nursing. And I said, well, I worked at the hospital for a year. I was a school nurse, but I haven't worked in nursing for 23 years. So I don't want to go back into nursing. She was like, but you could do the type of nursing that I'm doing. Because I was so afraid of going back into the hospital part of nursing because it is so fast paced and so has changed so much in 23 years. She was like, but you could definitely do the type of nursing I'm doing. She said, I go in and I do annual wellness visits for Medicare patients, which is the older population, which is why that is ironic now. That I she was like, "So just come observe us one day and see what we do and see if you would like that." So I went and followed one of the annual wellness nurses around, and they work at different doctors' offices. And when the patients are there to see their doctor and they're due for their annual wellness visit, that's a visit that Medicare wants each patient to have once a year. It updates their chart for the doctor. It offers them different wellness screenings. You talk about different wellness education. Um, so I got to do some education. And then you do a memory screening. And, it's a lot of paperwork, but not a whole lot of nursing. Um, but still doing a nursing job. And so I went and followed Brittany around for a morning and was like, oh, I think this is a job that I could do and would be fun. And I would go in those rooms and listen to those sweet little patient stories. And I was just like, oh, you are the sweetest little person. And while I was teaching, I lost my dad, and my husband had just recently lost his dad. And in that process, I was like, these elderly people need somebody that will listen to them, and especially the ones that are all alone, because there's a lot that are alone. And so when I was in that doctor's office with Brittany, I could just feel God saying, this might be the place for you. And so I prayed about it and applied for the job, and this was in February, last February. And I mean, I really hadn't decided I was going to leave. I wasn't planning on leaving for at least one more year in education, but God had other plans. And so I went for that interview, didn't find out anything. And told him, if I were to get this job, I wouldn't want to start until the school year ended because I didn't want to leave school in the middle of the year. I didn't feel like that would be fair to the kids I taught, or to the school. And so they came back and offered me the job with the knowledge that they would wait until June before I could start. So they offered me the job in March and they just kind of waited until I got out of school. And they have a monthly training program, and God lined it up so that I left school on Thursday. That was my last day. That was the last work day of last year, and that training started the following Monday. So I was able to go straight from teaching into nursing, over a weekend, which was great. Yeah. So it was very much a God thing. I also had, because, we got to get paid. So I had given them an amount of money that I needed, and they went above that, which was also a God thing. Because with my limited nursing experience, I didn't know like where I would rate nursing wise, but they included all of my years of education in there, which was definitely a God thing too. So he's just good like that.
What's the biggest similarity between working with young people and the elderly?
They just all want to be listened to. You just need to listen to people. Um, they love to tell their stories. Today I learned a story about a little guy that hadn't had the flu since he was 15, and the way he got rid of it was by putting hot sauce on his pinto beans and then covering up in blankets, and he woke up and was fine the next day. I was like, there you go. So, I hear such neat stories all the time from kids to adults. Just listening, I think, is the biggest similarity.
And if you had had the opportunity to like follow that person around and see what it was like to work with older people earlier, do you think you would have had that realization, or did that just have to come later in life?
I think that came later in life, as I got closer to the older people's age instead of the young people's age, I think that helped, but I think, really losing my dad and losing, Jonathan's dad, just seeing how that impacts people and how they move on from there, just really made me want to try to do what I could to help them, and then the verse about taking care of the widows, and I just felt like that was what I was called to do right now. So that's what I'm doing now.
So, what do you think your favorite part of what you're doing right now is?
Getting to meet these sweet people and hear their stories, they crack me up. They are so funny sometimes. But then there are some that are in really rough situations. And if we can connect them with resources, that is very rewarding. So, in that way, it's similar to the school nurse job in that we have resources that we can pull from or that we can provide to the patient so that they can hopefully get the help that they need outside of that doctor's office. So that has been great when we get to go in and, we scheduled a mammogram for a patient and they found out she had early stage breast cancer, but they were able to treat it. If she had not had that wellness screening, they may not have caught it. And so, I think doing things like that is the best part of the job.
So, going from what you said was just the best part of the job, what would you say is the hardest part of the job?
The hardest part of the job, now guys know I like to stay busy. So some days there's not a lot of patients for me to see. Like they either don't show up or they're just not on the schedule. So like yesterday, I was only supposed to have one patient all day. My goal was to have 10 a day, but I was only supposed to have one. I was like, oh, I don't like those days because I don't know. I mean, I'm searching through the charts, trying to find patients that I can see, but sometimes I've already seen them or, it's not time for their wellness visit. So those days when there's not a lot of patients to see, then I'm like, I don't know what to do with downtime because teachers don't have downtime. And so that has been a learning curve, trying to figure out what to do at that time when there aren't patients. I know I bugged the other staff in the office because I'm like, hey, can I help you do anything? Hey, what do you need? What can I do? What are we doing? They're like, nothing, just sit down. I'm like, okay, sorry, I can't help it.
So, from switching from teacher back into nursing, what was the biggest, maybe setback that you might have had or biggest, challenge going in between?
So it had been a long time since I had looked at medications and diagnosis. And so I spent a lot of time Googling when I first started that job, trying to figure out what medicines are used for which diagnosis, reminding myself of new diagnosis, what they mean, what that means for the patient. And so it was definitely a learning curve trying to get back into the skill set of a nurse, knowing that information, and then being able to intellectually speak to the patients. So that took a little time, but it has become easier the more months that I've been doing it and, looking at the medications, I can be like, "Oh, yeah, that one's for arthritis. That one's for high blood pressure. That one's for cholesterol." And so it helps me match because part of my job is to update the patient's chart. And so if they're getting a medication for cholesterol, then I need to make sure there's a diagnosis that says they have a cholesterol issue or like a blood test that says they have a cholesterol issue. If not, then insurance might not want to pay for it. And that's the other part of the job because insurance is important in healthcare. It helps cover the cost of it. And so just making sure that boxes are checked and that everything is in place to try to help the provider and the patient. So that took a little time. And I still have to Google things every day. I still look things up just to make sure. Even in a patient's room, they'll be like, "Well, what does this mean?" I'm like, "I don't know. Let's look it up together." And, I'll just tell them, "There's so many. I don't know." And I know I am butchering the names of some of these medicines. Why do they name them these? It's like they just put random letters out of the alphabet to come up with names of medicines. So that's been fun, trying to say those names to patients.
So, moving into kind of an overall perspective here, do you think there's a career that was your favorite, or do you think each one kind of just hit you at the right time?
I think God just gave me what I needed at each moment. Sometimes I didn't always see that. Um, and some days I still go home and don't see that. But, I think God gives us what we need at the time that we need it. And we may not realize it at the time. But when we step back and look, He all works it out. Like today, I was supposed to have 7 patients on my schedule. Well, 2 were at 1:40 and 2:00, and I was like, "Okay, I can do it. I can still do it and get out of there by 2:30." Well, I couldn't because that sweet man was telling me all of his stories, which was great. I loved him. Um, but the other patient didn't show up, so I still got to leave at 2:30. So that was a God thing, I just give him all the praise and glory for letting me be able to do what I do each day and um, be able to share with the patients and have gotten to teach such amazing kids and work with such amazing people at the hospital as a school nurse in the classroom and then now at Blue Ridge Healthcare. It's been wonderful.
What kind of skills did you learn in education and in just nursing as a whole that you use in your everyday life that's outside of your job?
Um, well, hopefully observation, um, and listening, looking and listening, um, are really important in both teaching and nursing. Um, I hope I do that. My children say sometimes I'm not very good at observing, but you know, they are observing for different things than I am, and we don't always are looking at the same thing. But trying to listen, trying to, I always try to just be kind to the patients that I get to work with. Hopefully the kids I worked with, I tried to, my phrase the last few years, if it's not positive, encouraging, or kind, you just don't need to say it. And so trying to carry that through in what I do now, but also at home and everywhere I go. That's kind of my direction and my compass. So taking that with me everywhere, I think.
Looking at every step that you've taken throughout your entire career, would you take that same path or would you change any of it?
Hmm. Well, if I could go back to college, my friend said that if I had stuck out chemistry, I could have, that the second chemistry was way easier than the first one. I don't believe her, but she said that first chemistry was the weed out chemistry. They tried to kick you out. They weeded me out. I didn't take any more after that. But she said that after that it got easier. And so sometimes I wonder, could I have gone to pharmacy school? Would I have enjoyed that? Would I have made it? I don't know. But I know I wouldn't have gotten to meet such awesome people doing that job, and so I'm thankful that see, even your no's have a reason. Um, everything has a purpose, so I don't think I would change anything in what I've got the chance to do.
Okay, so we'll ask one final question.
Okay.
So, what is the best advice you have for young people trying to figure out what they want to do in life?
Um, don't be afraid to take chances and don't be afraid to do something different than the crowd or your best friends. You have to do what's best for you at that time, and it might change. I mean, what's good for you today may not be good for you in 5 years or 5 minutes. I don't, it may change. And so just trusting yourself, um, asking questions is important. Um, you know, had I asked my friend if the second chemistry was easier, my life might be different, but I didn't ask those questions then. So asking questions is important, getting information, knowledge is power, truly. And so just finding information and things that you need to help make decisions. Don't rush into things. When you're making decisions, stop and think. And, I've always told my girls and others that I think it's important to get wisdom from above and to pray. And so that's how I've always tried to make my choices in life, was to try to listen and seek wisdom. And so I think you can do that from our Heavenly Father. You can do it from your family, from your friends, from trusted adults. And so that would be my advice. Ask questions, seek wisdom, trust yourself. Don't listen to everybody else. It's best for you.
Well, thank you, Jenny, for joining us today. Today's episode was recorded on March 31st of 2026. This episode was produced by Tehya and it was hosted by Amazin, Olivia Austin, and Anna Foresti.